to Questioning Mind. I'm your host, Sagarika, and today I'm joined by Abhivardhan. Abhivardhan is a lawyer in telecommunications and technology. He's the chairperson of ISAIL. He's also the founder and leader of many other think tanks and technology and legal forums. He's also a policy entrepreneur. He wears many hats. Abhivardhan, a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Abhivardhan, to begin with, let me ask you how you got involved in the legal tech space as a lawyer. How did you combine both of these?
First of all, Sagorika, thank you so much for this invitation, and I certainly appreciate that. I'd say that my interest in legal tech and the whole dynamics about, because it's a combination of law and policy and understanding tech, all of this came because I was interested in the intricacies of technology. And that interest came out of how we use ethics and ideas to create technologies, how they proceed with, how their genealogy works, and how it affects human lives. It's something which is quite interesting to start with, and something which is a very personal discovery for me. So that's how it came.
So you've been in this space for a few years now. You've started your own initiatives. You've done quite well in growing those initiatives, and there's several of them, not that I can list all of them here. So it's a space that is finding ground in New India.
I'd say yes, because when we look at the resurgence, as far as the youth is concerned, as far as the population is concerned, which is interested in the knowledge economy, I guess, yes, there are people, there are nuanced minds who are interested in not just the discourse, but also even trying to contribute in the research, because law is at the cornerstone of social sciences. And unlike STEM, wherein quality research is something important, in law, we need to see more in India. And yes, in that regard, I contribute in technology and international law, I'd say, but more into private and not public anymore. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, I'd say.
And you also host the IndusThink blog and you host the IndusThink podcast. So that in that way, you're a content creator as well for the cause.
I'd say IndusThink came out of this inspiration to discuss Indic ideas, and the blog was a personal effort. But then I thought, okay, there is somewhere down the line a case that nuanced ideas on the developments related to Indian cultural policy and other aspects of civilizational concerns, which we discuss all the time, despite any hangover in anything. I think I've seen this trend that whenever civilization as an idea is discussed in continental Europe or anywhere in the world, it's something which is done deeply. Now, in India, of course, we have had scholars and people, but there should be diverse minds who should discuss about several aspects. I can refer, for example, Amrit, who started Project Bharata podcast, because he is very well versed in history. He understands history, so he deals with history. I can tell you many podcasters who actually started. So kind of a content creator, although still I don't admit that much. But yeah, I really.
All right. So today we will be discussing digital media, its necessity, its weaponization. We will also touch upon AI and if via AI digital media is instead using us. I think you're very well suited to discuss that. Abhivardhan, what are your views on digital media bias, and why is the opacity of search results on any platform an issue? Or is it made too big a deal out of?
So digital media has its own structural problems, and it comes from the way algorithms are used. There have been people in the United States writing works on this, which they say algorithm bias, to very well coin it in legal terms. Now, one thing which happens is that if you look at the origins of these big tech companies like Google or Facebook, what we generally find is that they came out of the consent-based data, which is given by us. Now, of course, our consent is something which in legal terms cannot be quantified every time, because I can give any example, let it be a food delivery app or a transportation related app, and I can say, okay, fine, I give consent to that my data should be used. Now it is up to the entrepreneur how he uses it, right? Or he, she, or anyone for that matter, since being gender neutral is necessary. So anybody who uses a particular resource, a particular ecosystem of data can play with it, and algorithms merely are the drivers of it. And I think when it comes to digital media biases, the same happens with Google. I can tell you many obnoxious and normal examples which are there. If we search things, we don't find them like that. And it happens in Google Images, it happens in YouTube also. So yeah, there are these problems. And I'm pretty sure that there are research departments in every such company. Like Facebook has, now it's called as Meta. So it has Meta AI Research. It used to be Facebook AI Research. So they did a lot of research on this predictive analytics. And it turns out that, so first they propose, okay, there is a human bias. And since there is human bias, that's where the results are. But the problem is not just human bias, because a human is tended to be biased, because that's what a human tendency is after all. If objectivity is claimed, then it should be claimed with a sense that it is really sensible. But if it is only based for specific interests of consumerism, then it's not about human biases, it's about driving human biases. As if it is like saying, okay, capitalism is bad, but after all, it is about how you use capitalism. So it's just based on that. Anything can be used for any purpose, but it depends on that.
Now, that's an interesting distinction, saying that it drives human bias rather than is based on human bias. I think that's something that is, I heard a very big Indian producer say this many years ago, that all media was merely a reflection of our own society. However, it's not as simplistic or reductive as that. Media has played into creating a lot of those or furthering particular biases. So I suppose the same thing comes onto digital media as well. It's not merely big media or pop culture. So you see the possibility of, or do you see it actually happening, not just the possibility, but do you see it being weaponized in a certain manner by any sort of vested interest? Why I ask this is because when I was working in this field, that were, Google still releases that expert communication, whether it's Barry Schwartz, whether it's somebody else, talking about how SEO functions, what are the updates to their algorithms, and maybe use keywords, use backlinks, use some particular parameters to build authority. I know these are extremely old ideas, but there was a process to it. So more and more, these processes don't seem to be, especially in certain fields, whether it's media, whether it's videos and image search results, whether it's Indian history, politics, etc. These things don't seem to have as much bearing on the results. And when we talk about domain authority, we see that articles that have very few views, they are newer domains with lower loading speeds, with lower user friendliness. So, and still they seem to have higher optimization by big tech organizations, whether it's Google, right? Google is the most used search tool, and YouTube is the next, which is also owned by Google. So do you see that there's the opacity is a problem in terms of creating those biases that you mentioned?
Okay, so interesting question. So let's say, let me take the example of YouTube. So there was a time in before the Euro 2008 crisis, the financial crisis in European Union. There was a time when YouTube videos used to go viral at a specific limit, and that virality always mattered and varied. There are reports which show that several Hollywood stars have tried to, of course, add some extra million views to the video to actually, incentivize and, I would say double their views or triple or whatever, just multiply the views. I'm not saying that there are no original views, but what happens is that the transformation of internet has been rapid. And according to a very interesting analysis by Dr. Jeffrey Funk, who is, I would say, a technologist, a technology veteran. He has worked in various technology companies. He is also a retired professor in the University of Singapore, if I'm right, as my memory calls me. He says that innovation is slowing down now. So what happened in that time since 2008? It was the Obama era, because it was a very interesting era. It just boomed up. All those kind of content, if you remember, of those era which were coming up from the US, UK, and other parts of the world, they got viral. I can even refer to the South Korean content for that matter. But it's not just about region; it's also about, interestingly, how it works. Now, of course, I would have commented on the Chinese content, but the Chinese have blocked Google, the Chinese have blocked YouTube. So, of course, that doesn't apply there. Even the Indian content got viral in that sense. If we see, I can tell you channels which have 70 million subscribers on YouTube, or less, but of course, I'm mentioning one channel which of course has its own issues, and I would say subscriber fights. Which one gets the most subscribers? Content getting viral is a natural thing to happen, because it's something, as I said, we can have various kinds of biases, but after all, we all are humans. Now, the problem comes in wherein what kind of content is made viral. Now, there's a Brownian motion effect of content getting viral. There are reports on it. Several American and British researchers and European researchers have worked on it. But what leads to this kind of bias wherein specific outlets are only, multiplied and as far as their reach is concerned, and others affected? This comes in when a problem arises of your selectivity to ensure that this particular kind of content, which is not according to your understanding, does not do. But it's not a simple game, because I can tell you the best example of Joe Rogan in the US, who actually has maintained his supremacy on Spotify. And he invites various kinds of people. He is very much, according to my understanding, a very interesting case study, because his podcast and his content show that. I'm not going to comment much further on what he does, but yeah, whatever content is produced, it shows that there's a battle of monopoly, definitely. In legal terms, it's a different question of competition law, but it's a complicated question, because even at the legal realm, neither the I would say the SEC nor the European Commission have come up with a good model. The European Commission, however, has dealt pretty well with it, but still, they have to do a lot. Their regulation is not strong. Same with ours. We have an IT Act which is not capable to deal with these issues, and the Data Protection Act is yet to be passed. It's still pending in the standing committee. Let it come and let it pass. So I guess this bias problem comes in because, yes, using the flow of algorithms, people do try to stop, but it doesn't mean that everything can be. Otherwise, we would not have seen podcasters from India really doing well. It's just that it's after observation and understanding one model of how an algorithm works, which is predictive analytics, particularly, and then just attack at it. Let's see, what? Okay, this is what is vital. Let's see how we can stop it. But uh, ironically, I'll tell you a very interesting secret. Sometimes these new creators, a new wave of creators which came from India and all across the world, because we all know that it's not just the American creators anymore. There are other creators also. So TikTok was a platform which was which was owned by Europeans, but now, of course, we know that it was musical.ly. Now it is owned by the Chinese, and TikTok's virality is a very interesting case study. So I think I can express further, but to make it simple and short for you, I'd say that virality is a game. It's about understanding the market, how you receive it. Accessibility is, of course, thing, but everything is not accessibility. It depends on how it is, and I think there are a lot of interesting examples to learn from.
All right. So let me just make it very succinct. Do you see this as organic, or do you see this as forced by certain players? The searchability, not merely the virality.
It can be both. And of course, distinctively, it can be organic or it can be forced. The whole problem is what kind of content, because what I've seen in various research papers on AI and such kind of predictability is that, yes, there are attempts to ensure that organic outreach happens. But the problem is, if you only see one kind of content, it is very inevitable that you will be receiving that kind of notion outside, because that is how perception works. If let's give a simple example. If somebody is reading something in English only about a country, and not particularly understanding in other languages and so forth, of course the person will have one kind of perception. I'm not saying how same it would be, but there will be certain similarities, isn't it? So yes, organically you are having a content and you're using it for strategic benefits. That's what entrepreneurs do. But of course, I'd say that, people who are uh, very interesting content creators from India and across the world who have, I'd say, non-mainstream content, independent creators, they created their space by their own efforts. They understood how algorithms respond to them, the basics of them. Can't give examples, but yes, they did their own way. And that is how they actually challenged the monopoly, the presuppose. It's like a monopoly, like if you have a country of 100 people, you only have one market which sells apples, no other market. Obvious to happen. It's like that, but it's complicated because again, it's a question of how predictive analytics works. So it can be both. I'm not saying that it can't be forced, but we have also seen, if I can give one example to make it. So when President Joseph Biden got his inauguration done, many people disliked the video of inauguration. And then YouTube completely removed the like dislike option from that particular portion, right? It was a big nightmare for the Democrats and, of course, the Biden campaign, in the sense that, he was elected, but people in America were like, what, I'll just hit the dislike button. So, you can try to force it, but sometimes it's about public perception, how it works. Are people smart enough to understand all of that? That's why YouTube removed the dislike option, the stats, how many people disliked and all of that. Many reasons they will state, but I think what happened in America was a primary reason because that's their domicile as far as the company is concerned. So, yeah.
I actually was unaware of that being sort of main reason for it. Because that was something that has been discussed by YouTube content creators even in the US, and it was seen as something being driven purely through algorithms or to enhance creativity or whatever. But I was completely unaware of that reasoning. So that's actually my question. This is something a little major. I don't know if this happens on an everyday basis. My question and perhaps contention is that there are particular topics where keywords can be optimized in both both sort of articles. Say NDTV writes an article and says something like Swarajya writes an article, someone like Swarajya writes an article, regardless of how optimized, how old, or whatever their status is, one of them is going to be shown on top of the other without promotion by the organization themselves. So in this case, it is, is that just to clarify, if I am a reader of NDTV more than of Swarajya, will it will show me NDTV over Swarajya in that sense, right? It's personalized. But to a neutral third party, what you know that it'll show a particular site. So there is that bias that the digital tech companies have themselves.
So now, of course, if you are an NDTV viewer, you have a lot of alerts coming from NDTV about their breaking news, whatever. You will get more updates from them. The same applies to WION, the same applies to Al Jazeera, funnily, the same applies to the BBC, the same applies to any news channel. Now, of course, there's a case that there will be specific instances where political ramifications or any other reason we can state because community standards. And this is where an interesting game comes in. So, okay, now all of these social media companies are majorly American companies, isn't it?
Yes.
And we know that the free speech aspect is controlled by the First Amendment of the American Constitution. But there's a book by Ian Bradford, which proves that all of these community standards, whether on geotagging, whether on copyright, whether on hate speech, they're not inspired by American jurisprudence or American Constitution at all. In fact, they're inspired by the European Union's jurisprudence. And the European Union is very clear on this, right? So this tells us that it's a transnational impact of imposing your regulatory thing as a company because you have such a big user base. Now, since you have a big user base, you can do anything. And as you said about the problem of two outlets and one outlet showing more, it is bound to happen because you have personalized experience with that particular outlet. But yes, let us say you try to encourage yourself to mobilize and say, what? Let me watch some other outlet, maybe Swarajya, maybe RT, or maybe TRT now. I don't know. You can have anything. And you try to do it. There will be chances that you will be persuaded through these algorithms, you know what, no, don't leave NDTV, you can watch that also. All of that can happen. There's no problem with that, because that is how algorithms work. As I said, it's about the predictive analytics, how algorithms work on humans. But again, it's frankly like a laboratory, because algorithms are not perfect. There are data quality issues, compliance problems, and so it shows that, raw data is there. People, the developers have problems. Research scientists tell this. So, I think this problem comes in. There is definitely bias in terms of dealing with these things, because there are political ramifications. I can refer to one very controversial incident, but not so controversial that I can't say. So there was a particular video of the CEO of Pfizer. Okay, and Pfizer is a company which makes vaccines for COVID also. It's a pharma company in the US. Now, the CEO of Pfizer stated something on Twitter, basically a video, and that video got viral because somebody said, okay, fine, something like that. And then the implications was the company filed an application stating that it's a copyright violation. What happened? Wherever the video is posted, it's gone, completely gone. And then what's like, okay, it's gone, so you can just see it. But already it had gone viral. Millions of people had seen it, right? Now here you see a move to use law as a means to prevent your reputation to being damaged a lot again and again. But of course, that reputation is gone. So these games are done by deeply understanding how the laws work. And I think therein a contribution lies in, because these are West dominated companies. If it had been a case for TikTok or any Chinese based app, I would have seen the same for China. What is the law in China? And of course, the question will come in whether they will address and adhere with the Indian laws or the domestic laws of a particular country for that particular user. So of course we can discuss that. And I think therein lies the game. So here you go.
Okay. So far, I think you've been extremely you've done a balancing act, honestly, in terms of explaining whether the big tech companies in fact impose their own biases on their consumers. And it is my understanding that it does in fact happen. If we look at the firing of the India head of Facebook, when she admitted that she was rooting for a particular political party, she was taken, she was asked to resign. However, the same thing is not always applied. So that is something that shows that they do have a good grip, regardless of the algorithms of the consumers themselves. They do seem to have a good grip on the content they showcase as well. So just moving on, you mentioned that the Biden issue caused the dislike, but similarly, we've seen very big scale sort of cancel culture happening, especially in the US, but we've seen it pick up a lot on Indian grounds as well. Recently, R.P. Singh, one of the founders of a major news, now very popular news publication, she was deplatformed by Twitter. She fought a legal case to have her, account restored. She's not been particularly active since then, but yes, she had to take recourse of the law. And then we've seen Trump, of course, sitting president of the US, was deplatformed by these personal citizens. They are citizens in their, private citizens of a nation, right? After all, the owners of the big tech organizations function as private citizens. So how is this, do you see this, like I mentioned previously, weaponizing a particular platform?
Okay, so the example of Donald J. Trump is interesting. And of course, you mentioned about the Delhi High Court case, wherein, of course, the honorable journalist won the case. And that's great. It shows that Twitter just can't deplatform anybody arbitrarily. There should be a way to do so. But the good part with the Delhi High Court case was that in the case of Aarti Tikuji is that it was clear as to what was the issue. Now, what happens is that a precedent has been created, and therefore it can help in future cases. But for this, you will need a lot of judicial competency as far as basically having such forums wherein such issues are dealt. Because I think a legal question comes in whether a social media can act as a public utility. In fact, podcasters like Tim Pool and others have discussed about it, and there's a debate going on in the United States. So it relates to my point of YouTube and all of these companies not following the First Amendment at all. In fact, we know that the now CEO of Twitter, Parag Agarwal, when he was the CTO, he stated that First Amendment is not a priority for us as far as regulation is concerned. Of course, there are certain justifiable grounds, maybe could have some. I'm not saying I'm supporting it. I'm just saying that the grounds could be like, let's say, so the First Amendment is very bland about free speech, and of course, people consider that there should be restriction. But again, the negative effect which comes in is that how and why, because it is not tried and tested properly. And most of the time we see in democracies around the world and even in other places around the world that in the name of hate speech, blocking happens, people are blocked or restricted, and very arbitrary grounds than in most cases. And the more arbitrary grounds you give, the more problems it causes to the people. That is how things work. That is how these authorities do. And most of the Anglosphere countries, and since India has adopted the British Westminster form of system, we have common law system also. So sadly, bad precedent causes bad policy decisions. Then again, ugly legal issues. I'm really glad that the Delhi High Court case really happened and a good precedent was created. In the case of Trump, I think the problem was that first of all, he was a sitting president. You just can't deplatform somebody like that. It's just abhorrent to do so. Yet it was done, and it sadly shows that the big tech was not doing it to merely say, oh, you know what, I've just done it. It was also maybe a policy intent to show that, you know what, we have this much value and that much influence. Because, yeah, yeah, kind of. And it relates to the, the 6th January incident. And you can refer to the recent hearings by the Republican senators as they have been questioning the FBI, and there is a lot of ugly stuff going on there. So until it is proven much more, I can't say. But I think it shows that again the same problem. It starts with the domicile. American laws, American regulations, but companies have autonomy. Then they use their power. Of course, they have power because they have influence. They inspire from other laws. It's a whole complicated situation out there. But yes, I think uh, in India, we have created a precedent. We understand how Western companies work, how they contribute and basically engage with us. You mentioned about the former head of Facebook who actually had resigned. She was also a part of Raisina Dialogue by ORF, and I think good conversations had happened there. But problem was that Indian actors at a public level, which is the government, try to engage with these social media companies. Okay, I mean, I can mention that Facebook and not Twitter, but Netflix and all of these companies have partnered with ORF for Isina Dialogue or Sci-Fi and all of these events, which is perfectly fine because I mean Microsoft also does it a lot. I mean for the Niti Aayog also, various reports on AI ethics have come in consultation with representatives from Microsoft and all of these companies, Accenture, Microsoft, so on, which is perfectly fine. You should engage with the private sector of foreign and Indian nature. Then my whole problem is a lack of consistent policy, because then it affects the citizens generally. And since it can become public utility, which we can discuss later, why social media can become a public utility, sadly, which it is, because that's how technology went in. Otherwise, we would never have had Zoom and Google Meet and all of that. So I think these questions need to be dealt very, very seriously. And one by one, I think good precedent can be created. That case was absolutely brilliant. I think a lot can be done. And I think a lot should be seen in that.
So apart from her, I'm aware of several other content creators in India, say Sham Sharma, AKTK, all of these, they have been deplatformed for a certain amount of time. There's actually a lot of them who have had their videos taken down. They've had, however, at the same time, these technology companies have let videos of murders in real time, of child pornography, of rapes go unpunished, unmoderated. And this is somehow not determined as hate speech or, comes under the freedom of expression, which they seem to protect. So that does not make much sense, whether in society or legally.
Indeed. And I think there again lies the problem that their regulatory, which is what we call a self-regulation in law. So companies can regulate whatever they wish to do. I can give you examples of food delivery apps around the world which have their own self-regulation standards. Well, you know what? Okay, fine. If you're not vaccinated, you'll not get delivery. for example, I'm just hypothesizing, or you know what, we only serve non-veg. I'm just only giving the example of platforms which are food delivery platforms, or let's say a transportation app which says, you know what, okay, you have to have one dose or a booster dose and all of that. This all can happen. Okay, crazy, this can happen. So self-regulation is a thing which is a problem and a bane and a boon at the same time, because first of all, you can't have a big state every time. In the IT age, companies take a role. Now the problem that comes in with pornography and all of these issues is that, of course, there is selectivity. There's no doubt about it. And to some extent, in many cases, I think it is proven that they understand the algorithmic reach pretty well, but it is just that they are commercially compromised, they're somehow politically compromised, or maybe they're not, but maybe they are using it as
And you're being extremely
something to, yeah.
diplomatic while stating those things.
No, I'm not being diplomatic. I'm
Mhm.
being more of a, like, as I call myself, an Indian realist,
Mhm.
because I think what happens with us is that this turns out to be a problem of digital colonialism. But again, that turns out to be the problem of how we treat digital colonialism, because our regulations are not consistent. As I said, the IT Act is only capable to deal with matters of cybercrime and e-commerce. It
Mhm.
can't deal with things like social media, even the new social media guidelines. There's an article by Arihan Panwaria on Swarajya. You can read that. How is that the social media rules are very ineffective because they're very, very hardwired. I can give one example. So this happened in the Karnataka High Court or the Madras High Court. So the ironically, Twitter India claimed, and this is very funny, okay, legally very funny. Twitter India claimed that, you know what, we are not actually run by Twitter US, we are run by Twitter Singapore. So you're trying to create your legal relationship complicated. And then you are trying to basically show in the court, you know what, oh, just leave me, I'm this and that. Then even Twitter Incorporated says, I have not invested my shares in Twitter India. Sorry, Twitter Communications India. How funny is that? So they try to, play these legal games and then show, you know what, this is the problem. But I think it comes with the lack of consistency. We have interacted with the West very well. We will interact with the West always, but I think we should have better regulations. I think the NCPCR, which is the Commission for Child Protection, and also the NCW, the Commission for Women, National Commission, they are doing a fabulous job. Or just sometimes they are tagged on Twitter, and I've seen various instances. So yeah, that's happening. But it's just that
That's ad hoc and not
better
policy.
regulations.
That is
Hmm?
not policy
Yeah.
based. That's merely ad hoc and them taking it case by case. It's a piecemeal approach. Obviously, everybody going through those issues is not going to get that recourse by Twitter. So it's not a policy decision.
Exactly. I think experientially people should come up with a regulation, but again, dangerous, because self-regulation means a bottom-top regulation, something which happens through entities, companies. It can happen even through, I don't know what, community apps, but a top-down regulation is to the state. So it is a conscious decision which has to be made by the state and the functionaries. Kitna chahte ho, how much you want to regulate. I think I can relate it with the cyber cells of police stations, how they act, how efficient they are. So I think, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, the cyber cell which has come in with the UP police, they're doing a fabulous job. They tag, but they are like, internally they have an internal policy of understanding these things, and they have an experience now. Now you want to legalize it or not is again a question of legal autonomy. How much autonomous you are, how much clear you are, do you have good faith, all of that.
So far the attempts at making policy regarding IT in India, how do you see, how far do you see it has progressed? I have realized I've come across news where a lot of these companies, including several media outlets, have showcased a lot of outrage against the policy even being framed. So saying that it will curtail freedom of expression in that sense, and in that sense, do you see the Indian state making any efforts? Now, I am in agreement with you saying that we certainly don't need a big state when it comes to monitoring aspects like, say, work from home was illegal until they, actually looked into it a couple of years ago due to the pandemic situation. And we don't need a big state like that. However, an overarching public policy when it comes to IT organizations, as it has shown in the US to impact the national integrity of the democratic system. Does that make sense to take up as a prerogative urgently? Is that something you would look into?
So I am partially an advocate of the big state because we need a big state. But I think big state and free markets can go hand in hand.
Of course.
We have the example of Singapore and China. I'm not saying we should be China at all, but I'm just saying, you know what, a big state with laissez-faire free markets to some extent is fine.
Mm.
My whole problem comes in when experientially we don't realize that, you know what, the problem has come to at our face and we are not able to face it. I think there lies the big problem. So we need regulation. We need, however, better regulation. Now, on the question of free speech, now what happens in India is, of course, our understanding of free speech is very skewed. So after all, public policy people, or civil servants or policemen or women, let's say, people who are involved in this aspect in the administration, they are also imperfect humans, right? They will also make mistakes somehow, due to many reasons. I mean, I can get to so many funny examples, but don't wish to. But yeah, they will make mistakes. And I think a problem lies in is that often podcasters talk about this thing called the Brandenburg versus Ohio precedent, which is reasonable to start with the American precedent. And yes, I think in that case, the claim of the state to curb free speech in general is okay, somebody has free speech, but it might affect something. But again, what impact? And what happens in India is that we have very arbitrary and polyvocal judgments, sometimes even through the courts, with utmost respect to the courts and with the intent of not violating the Contempt of Courts Act. So sadly, it's a problem which happens because of lack of mobility and lack of awareness. We have the tools, sometimes we don't advance properly, sometimes we make mistakes, but it doesn't mean that the responsibility or the accountability of the big tech and all of these emerging tech companies, or any company for that matter, just goes away. It's like saying, imagine an NGO which is in India, okay, any local part of India, it's serving the people. Basically, the Supreme Court of India in various cases has said that, you know what, private entities like NGOs do have a public duty. In fact, even education is a public duty. If a private institution recognized by the UGC is teaching, it's a public duty. Now, पब्लिक ड्यूटी है तो क्या लीगल रेगुलेशन हो सकता है? क्या प्रेसिडेंट आ सकते हैं? Yes. Problem is, again, okay, so if an NGO says we are funding, we are helping people, we are doing this, if they somehow commit a fraud, they are subjected to legal regulation. They have to pay some penalties, or they might be shut down. The same applies to FCRA regulations, right? So of course, as you say that no law should be made, all of that stuff which you talk about, and I understand that where that comes from. I think that comes from because I have observed that there are two kinds of people in this regard. Of course, there are more. One is a kind of people who use political marketing as a way to basically, corner out anything which is a reform or anything which is even a regulation at the first place. It's a different question whether it is, unconstitutional in their own legal terms or not, because everything is not about constitutional law. It's also about whether it works for a limited time or not, whether it is second order effect is not damaging, whether it is helpful or not. Now in India, the problem is with free speech, we don't understand free speech. Second, we have very undoable standards. And third, when we talk about decolonizing our society, is not society, let's say, the legal system, we just don't even understand that Purva Paksha and all of that thing. It does come by experience. It does come by basically reacting. Now I can tell you that there are organizations, not naming them, they basically went ahead in Vadodara and they basically burnt the Kama Sutra. Ironically, that happened. Now, what does it have to do? What does it have to do basically here? Now it has to have to do, because then they will say, no, this is not a part of the culture. How? The Kama Sutra doesn't talk about one aspect which they always hyphenate about. It does also talk about other things. And again, it is not something which is quote unquote blasphemous. But again, it depends on how you treat blasphemy and all of those things. So in India, the thing is, yes, lack of awareness. I'm not saying that there's no accountability. I'm just saying the moment you realize, you should act on it. And I think a lot is there. So I don't intend to generalize, but I think I've seen so many issues like that day by day that I've got bored. I've seen, yaar, kuch naya karo law mein, yaar. There can be so much precedents coming. Wahi घिस के you are discussing. So, that's why you read the social media guidelines for fun, you'll find the same problem, that it's good, but it's not effective because it only gives you a whipping hand. It doesn't give you a long-term perspective of how you will regulate. I am for a big state. I'm not saying, because see, we have a problem that we still do not have as far as our GDP is concerned, better investment in R&D. And as a country, we should not say, "Bhaiya, sirf companies karengi." You should also do. You should start doing that. We as the government should do it. You can do it to state government, you can do it to union government, you can do it for statutory body, you can decide accordingly. You can do it to anyone, but it should be done. So I think it lies in that way. I mean, free speech is something which is inalienable and should exist. It just depends on how you define the impact. Because I can tell you many issues of bail also, how they are dealt with. As one famous lawyer says, unfortunately, uh, jail is the rule, bail is the exception. It happens like that because of such issues. So again, it affects us. Again, it affects us. So it can be used by any foreign entity or anyone for any reasons.
All right. Next, you mentioned that. See, I absolutely agree that democracy ensures that that is requires that there is citizen participation. It cannot be left to arbitrarily appointed government bodies and state functionaries to do so. However, the public policy to be changed has to go through the process of executive, legislative, judiciary. So for that to actually happen, like I mentioned, I saw quite a lot of roadblocks in that when there's public outrage fomented by a lot of powerful bodies functioning in journalism and media. So that happens. And that I think needs to at least be taken cognizance of by the state in order to frame these policies to deal in the longer term instead of just being reactionary. Like one thing happens, somebody's deplatformed, that might set a precedent in this case. However, somebody Twitter could have taken it to the Supreme Court, they could have won. There's nothing really to say. However, when it is framed into public policy, there's a much more streamlined manner of dealing with these issues. So do you see that happening again in your personal capacity, in your personal understanding? Is that something you're looking at, ensuring?
So yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that there are vested interests who have their own political interests. My theory is that they are more like marketeers anyways.
Mhm.
Because what happens is that there are many credible institutions who used to do good work,
Mhm.
but again, that is a different thing how you define good work, because then context of colonialism, post-colonialism will come in. But leaving that for now, let us assume they did some good work. Let us say they did some work which was not harming people, which was not harming populations. But if you use your influence to somehow harm people, and it does have happened with social media, because social media companies, for example, they act as public utilities. Like for example, when the pandemic came in, we are pretty sure that all of these social media companies did partner with the Ministry of Health and Welfare, Health and Family Welfare of the government of India, didn't they? So they did, right? So that happens, which is fine. You have to do it with social media companies because they amplify your rhetoric as well as your statements. You know what, the campaign of dawai jab tak dawai nahi tab tak kadai nahi, and all of that. So of course that should happen. I'm all for it. In fact, in the International Film Festival, which happened in Goa, we see a collaboration of various such entities with the government of India, which is very legit to do so. I think at a larger level, we will need alternative platforms to handle with our own commercial and political problems. Coup app is one example to start with. I would also say that the ongoing so-called social media tussle, which Elon Musk tried to start on Twitter, followed by some very funny reactions. We see one thing that, okay, Elon Musk says, "ठीक है भैया मैं आ जाता हूं," and all of that. I'm not getting on the portion of whether EVs should come in India or not. But since Ola already started its work with, electric vehicles like scooters, I think, and Ather Energy also in Bengaluru, I think it's already possible for us to indigenize and come up with quote unquote global solutions, which even our external affairs minister in the recent global technology summit talked about. That, what, we need global solutions. After all, entrepreneurship cannot be regulated completely by law. The best can be done is better practices in regulation can be adopted. So I think biases are there. This problem is a very general trend. For India, it's somehow, of course, a disadvantage for us and Indians in some ways, because uh, digital inclusion has to happen a lot. UPI has done a great job. I agree. The COVID app helped us in vaccination. I agree. Aadhaar API, despite Aadhaar's real genuine problems, has helped us a lot. Okay, the income tax process has become better. The passport process has become better. So digital inclusion is happening. The Ujjwala Yojana shows it. Okay, all of that is happening, and I'm in full support of that. I think the government will do it pretty well, which also shows that the government is socialist in a digital nature also,
Yes.
funnily, because there's a difference between socialism and welfareism also. If you are welfareist too much, there's a very interesting thing happened with the government in the WTO. They lost a case, and what happened was that they were increasing the MSP of rice crops, okay, in the fiscal year of 2018 to 19. Now, ironically, you did it to such a limit that basically, according to the WTO regulations, as far as GATT is concerned, you violated international law. So India did what? It went for appeal. Anyways, it would do, because we know that appeal, when happens, nothing else would happen. And then the game stops there. The story ends there. So yeah, I mean, again, shows that the farm laws were effective. You needed the farm laws. You can't go with too much MSP. You created an option. In fact, when the ordinances came in, the farm ordinance, before the laws were passed in the parliament, there was one article by Financial Express which showed that the farmers were leaving the MSP route through the Adhatyas and all of that, APMCs. And they were saying, you know what, we are going through the independent way, through corporates or anyone. Now, like you said, the problem is, you know what, let people say, "Arey, ye law nahi aana chahiye because it causes problems." How have you foresaw it? How have you foreseen it? Sorry, not foresaw it, foreseen it. Pardon my English. How have you foreseen it? So you can foresee anything and you can say, "Arey, nahi, iska policy impacted." But clearly batao. And it depends. As I said, politics affects courts also. A retired judge at the Honorable Supreme Court stated that certain law media channels and reporters, they basically try to affect their process. They try to involve and influence their judicial process. I can tell you various law graduates coming as law reporters who don't even understand legal reporting at all. They report anything unreasonable. They don't understand competition law. They don't understand technology. They don't understand company. They should, because that is their job to do so. Okay, they took the job and they're responsible for it. If you're not, then you say you're a propaganda organization. You are like, or you're like not a law reporter. Simple. But it depends on organizations how to do so. Sadly, that's the case. But I think we need to be efficient, and that is why some former diplomats suggested that there should be something called an Indian digital service. Maybe, yeah. I think we need the kind of bureaucrats who understand the digital world pretty well. I don't know.
Especially since you say that even American organizations function on the basis of European laws. So that seems very, very arbitrary in an Indian context, which is far geographically, but extremely far societally from such nations and such entities. Now, coming to your point about them not knowing their jobs when it comes to reporting and acting as propaganda outreach organizations, I found this very interesting article that you wrote about how free speech protection becomes an act of quality hostage for all these mediums. This is something that's been talked about, but I think you're framing it in the sense of it being an, act of quality hostage is something quite interesting. Why don't you explain more about what you mean by it?
So quality hostage is possible. So let me give an example. I've been in Twitter for a while now, and I've interacted with various people. I've been on social media portals, including LinkedIn. I've seen one thing, that when I interact with people, the social media portals try to represent that nuance, in a sense that, what, just because people are there, there's a sense of natural interaction. There's an instinct, and that's like a Brownian motion. Me interacting with anyone for that matter. So at a very preliminary and normal level, let us say, when nothing is happening, I found many interesting individuals and communities across through social media. Now that, of course, is not because of social media, but it is simply because social media became that globe or sphere where I can interact with these people. The problem comes in that, of course, as I said, algorithms and the games and developers know that very well, how prediction works and machine learning works. They, of course, understand what kind of users we have. That is how, if you study Twitter, so Twitter is, of course, having losses. Okay. Under Jack Dorsey, it was suffering a lot. And even under Parag Agarwal, it's trying to get off now. Parag Agarwal is trying to change things. So despite the fact, and this is a very interesting phenomena, after Donald Trump was blocked everywhere, Twitter suffered a huge loss again.
Mm.
So shares went down, many other issues, companies shared their losses. Now, uh, one thing which Twitter shows, ironically, is that it is a portal where there are coincidentally accounts and content which actually, by the virtue of the UI, virtue of the design, that what you can only write in 280 characters and all of that. And it's so handy, unlike Facebook, like an ecosystem app, which is so hefty. You have to go to a post, then repost it, and all of that stuff. It's very hefty. But Twitter is like, you post a video, you post a GIF, and done. Boom. The whole conversation starts. And that is how the nature of Twitter thread started. People, instead of writing long articles and research papers, said, you know what, enough of this, mujhe ek thread karna hai. And people start writing threads, nuanced threads, or maybe rhetoric, I don't know. But you can see in various fields. Even Indian individuals do. I came across various kinds of people, and I see that they communicate through threads in a better way, which shows that the UI of Twitter works. It's a different question that they use polarization and all of this thing, because polarization can happen in any way. I can tell you that even the content creators from India who are doing pretty well, and I wish they always do well, they also contribute to the monetization of YouTube and its revenue anyways, and other platforms. Okay, this is very obvious to happen. My platform will also do, your platform will also do. It will happen for Spotify also, if you are there, for example, and of course it applies to others. So ye to hona hi hai. So I think presence and of course battling these issues is always a tricky job. But content hostage happens because it's a coincidence that you find people digitally in these platforms. And but it is also because there's a lack of alternative. You don't have enough platforms which can actually make it happen. So it's always a difficult job to do so at the beginning. But after all, I am of the view that as new alternatives will come in, as Web3 is emerging, I think we will see more platforms coming up. In fact, it is just my view, nothing against QApp. QApp is a nice one, but it really needs to do more. I think it really needs to have people, and it needs to do algorithmic research. I guess it is doing it considering its own interests. But once it masters in that, you see the game which will happen. And I think Indian entrepreneurs can do that. They have the potential. So it's just that content hostage happens because the UI helps. It's very handy. It's very happy. Nice. You can use it. That's what Twitter delivers to you. Of course, Twitter can make you mad also. Twitter research shows that, for example, Instagram can affect minor girls and children of all sorts, and they can affect their minds as far as many stereotypical ideas are concerned, whether fairness or whatever. So we see that happening with Instagram Reels. And yeah, one battle which I'll tell you, content hostage. You remember that Clubhouse came in some time back, right? So it was only available on iPhone, which is iOS.
Yes.
But then it got available on Android. And then many people came on Clubhouse. Now, Clubhouse, of course, has market competition with Twitter Spaces, and it's still working there. I'm sure there are more alternatives. But then Twitter Spaces came in and said, you know what, we'll do it in our own way. And somehow Twitter Spaces is now doing better than Clubhouse.
Yes.
Ironically, you used a simple microblogging site, simple GIF poster, you converted into Spaces, you added other features. There's also one more thing called Twitter Review, REVUE, which is also being used for paid subscribers. Now you can also fund people money through Twitter. It's possible, but it's only for specific accounts which are verified or not verified. It depends on who are the accounts. So it's not that everybody has it. But yeah, anyone can do it. It depends on when Twitter allows you to. So it's a game of technology. I think lawyers, scholars, even citizens need to understand how technology works. I'm not saying be a PhD in technology or something like that. I'm saying just understand the game. After all, as I said in the beginning, we are all being tested like lab rats, sadly. But this is how technology perpetuates. So whether consent or not, it had to happen.
Just to put my point across, in my understanding, what you're saying is that citizens have a duty to sort of take this upon themselves, and you hope that indigenous platforms will provide the solution to the problems of, say, let's call it digital colonization, like using rules and policies from a completely different nation or political society to affect our own, as well as their biases of big tech. Now, my idea is that, or my understanding in this case is that that is going to be an extremely long game. I'm not against it, but you've seen the case with Parler. When Parler was created, AWS decided that they would deplatform it. Now, we don't have anything like AWS at this time. We don't have anything giving competition to Twitter. The first time coup happened, their service crashed with the amount of people that were going in all excited. Now, with regards to coup, in fact, I had an interesting conversation with Amrit, who just offhand suggested that it would work if the current government actually decided to step off of Twitter and come only on coup. And that would force a lot of international leaders as well to start using the platform. And that makes sense. It actually requires a sort of protectionism for Indian tech. However, the platform itself is not user-friendly enough to please everybody, and I completely understand their concerns for not doing so. However, like I'm saying, it's a longer game. So in this context, I would actually think that public policy framing, laws, and an effective IT Act would be more necessary at this time, especially for the longer term, because self-regulation is certainly not working.
Yeah, of course. I think it can be done simultaneously. I suggest a better policy. I'd say do it simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's about the creativity of developers. I mean, we have Indian Americans and people on H-1B visa who are actually acting as developers in America. And I have seen trends that some Indians are trying to come back to us. So let's use those IT professionals and let's come up with these kind of things. I remember that as a matter of necessity, uh, a particular team of people in a company called Nodding Head Games, they had to sell their house to basically make a game called Raji. That game is now available to play. You can download it. It's very cheap to buy. And I had played it. It was on Indian mythology, and
Yes.
Very interesting. A girl was there, a Rajasthani Marwari context, and she was playing a game. She's using Trishuls, Darshan Chakra, etc. Now you can create that base, and of course that can happen. But of course, you need an ecosystem of investors. You have to use strategically how your investors act. And I think one trend can come in, which is the coup. I think companies will start to do. I think there should be a simultaneous process. As I told you, somehow if the government is, as you stated about the thing that what government of India and its functionaries should leave Twitter, which is a very good point you made, and Amrita also made it very well. I think the government is not willing to do that right now, and I'm not saying that it should not do. I think it should do because it will help it, provided, of course, it uses sustainably, and of course that as a public utility, coup helps because you need a public utility. So that is according to the Supreme Court judgments. I'm not quoting out of my own opinion, but yeah, I think it's possible to have public utility of social media. So yeah, can do it. I think maybe other collaborations can happen, but then the government has to fix its digital media conglomeration as far as Twitter is concerned, and all of these companies are concerned. Facebook is playing a long game. We all know that Mukesh Ambani is invested in Facebook too, and Meta/Facebook is playing a long game. Google is going to play a long game. Google India is very much integrated inside. So to, let's say, to control the tendency of digital colonialism is the first step, and I think that cannot happen in one day or 1 year or one decade. It will take a long time. It is also about how technology advances, and that is why I think the better we invest in R&D, the longer we can see how these trends come in. And I think that's why when I wrote that article, of course I was being honest on this, but then I realized that maybe I'm more interested in the trends that come in. So let something exciting come in, and I think a lot can be sought further. But I'm hopeful. I think the government can do it, and yeah, even the courts can be good forums. Good judgments are needed.
I'm going to put your law of fraternity on the spot here and suggest that digital decolonization, like you mentioned, is something that can that need not take that long. It need not take a decade, because the colonization happened really quickly, right? We allowed that. And with the help of a stronger IT Act, especially since you're in favor of a bigger state in IT, I think that can be achieved very quickly, as long as the policy is not curbing general free speech as such. It just ensures that nobody else does it either.
Indeed. So interestingly, let's take an example. Let us say that Amazon India, right? So Amazon is available in various languages now. uh, we know that Visa and Mastercard are already frustrated because of Rupee, and the Americans are thinking, you know what, array, the UPI, I get what we can do. So UPI as a technology made a revolution, and I think that is something which is there. So I think there is one more initiative happening under the government. I can't remember the name right now, which is already taking place at a general level to ensure that consumer marketplaces at an electronic, which is e-marketplaces, let's say, I'm using very old school terms, but yeah. So e-market spaces, e-market places for people can really help out, and they can just create a revolution altogether. And I think this can happen rapidly once access is given and people are using it. I think it can very well challenge Amazon and so forth. And one day what will happen is maybe we would not. So for example, in Amazon, what happened was there was a recent case where the Competition Commission of India tried to deal, okay, with certain competition policy issues with Amazon. Guess what happened? It did not work out properly. And why? Well, the reason is that that's not the solution. Even the EU tried to do it and it did not work. So what you need is a regulation, yes, and you need certain short-term regulations which work. Long-term regulations can be developed with time, and there should be flexibility in the jurisprudence so that it works pretty well, so that it doesn't happen that, you know what, the existing jurisprudence and the existing system basically stops you from doing anything. If it is stopping you, then there's some problem with the legal system, and there's some restraint of the legal system. It is not mobilized. Like in Supreme Court or other courts, if you're giving polyvocal judgments on one issue, basically trying to reconcile every side, then you have a rule of law problem. So I think a lot is possible. One mechanism which people say is through ADR, which is to say dispute resolution mechanisms developing. Once that happens, I think research is going on. In fact, I'll tell you, I came up with a report with my team at ISAIL, which was about competition law and digital colonialism. In fact, I covered a portion on digital colonialism and basically quote unquote decolonization. But I think our conclusion also was that it is an incremental process. It's a challenge. It's a strategic challenge. It's like a game also. So I think something can happen. But uh, I might be accused of saying that, I might be accused of putting a balancing act, but it's just like I'm being curious to wait. And that's why I think these consequences have made me realize in maturity that, you know what, yes, this thing happened. I think that case of the founder of New Indian is something which is a good thing to start with. And I think a lot development should happen. And I think once they happen fast, I think a lot we can talk about also on that.
Yeah, that got resolved within 2 weeks, so that was good. That's not something that took time. So if that's how these cases proceed, and maybe we'll see some solutions. However, again, my only thing is that everything cannot be ad hoc. It cannot be piecemeal. It cannot be reactive. It has to have a policy behind it, so that not everybody is left hunting for a lawyer to go to court and deal with organizations that are behemoths in their own rights. So that's something that we need to guard against. And so my insistence on public policy being as important as indigenization of technology, of course, that's something that goes without saying. And I think, of course, KU has done a good job. It's received a lot of governmental support as well. And yes, UPI is probably the best example. You've stated that as well. But like I said, like that, there's a lot of resources requirement. There's nothing like AWS. How do you come up with the sort of hard resources that are necessary in terms of the data centers, in terms of the funds that are required to set up something as massive? Of course, we need to start somewhere, but I'm just saying that we'll always be And when the government did put in place a law asking for data centers data to be stored locally, and even that has been contested. So yeah, these are challenges that I think need a certain shorter term solution in the course of law, which is why I'll put you and your fraternity in the spot. But yeah, that's my idea so far. However, Abhivardhan, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to having you on the channel again very soon. Thank you so much for joining, and I will let you go now.
Definitely. It has been a pleasure. Just one hint to give to the viewers. There's something called the Ministry of Cooperation already. So a lot great things can happen there also, maybe. So yeah, let's see. And I think I would be really happy to come again.
Now we need to know more.
I'd say let's keep the curiosity.
Sure. All right, we'll discuss that the next time then. And thank you again so much for joining us.